day for that. But today, we are learning all about transportation with our Executive Director, Bill Lawson. He has been the Executive Director since 1991 and has worked for MVHS since 1987. That's 39 years with MVHS and 35 as our Executive Director. Yeah. I was going to make a joke that I've only been alive 2 years longer than MVHS. And Dante wasn't even born yet when he became director. Anyway, he is past president, trustee at large, and regional representative of the Ohio Local History Alliance. He's a member and past president of the Rotary Club of Youngstown and a board member for Youngstown City State. He has been a guest lecturer for the History, American Studies, and Sociology departments at Youngstown State University, and has authored articles and book reviews on local history for local and professional periodicals. And he's also the co-author of Mahoning Memories, a history of Youngstown and Mahoning County, which we all very lovingly call the Bible. And then he also holds his bachelor's and master's degrees in history from Youngstown State. So everybody, you're welcome.
Well, thank you for all that, Tracy. All right. Good afternoon. I think I'll handhold it when I go back and forth here. I am pleased and surprised by such a large turnout. I see some transportation aficionados here, whether it be trains or automobiles or whatever the case may be. And let's keep in mind something. I got 45 minutes, and well, as far as recorded history, about 230 years to cover. So we're going to move along, and this is going to be an overview, and we're going to be dealing with personal transportation, public transportation, commercial transportation, and again, it'll be an overview. And I started off my title page with an iconic image in downtown Youngstown. Oh, good, thank you. Probably the 1920s that was taken, and you can see those are the Erie Railroad tracks, 2 locomotives coming through downtown Youngstown, and the old St. Columba Cathedral up on top, which at that point I think was just a parish until 1943 when it became a cathedral. And so obviously transportation defined our community and helped it grow and sometimes presented challenges. So I'm going to touch on that, and I can guarantee you that I'm going to miss something. So I want to allow some time at the end that you can ask questions or we can have a discussion. And then we have some show and tell here. If you haven't seen it already, you can come up and I'll explain that at the end as well. Okay? All right, so what I want to do with this subject is I'm going to present development and history of transportation in eras, and we'll go chronologically, though a lot of them overlap, as you will see. And so what were the major elements of these eras? What was the most prevalent and profitable modes of transportation, and some of the nuances related to that. For the end, I want to do a couple things. I want to touch on some of the issues that we have today or historically that we're still working on related to our transportation networks, and also show you where and how to find out more information about our region's transportation history. So, we're going to start a long time ago, like 15,000 years ago, and lead us up until about the first 40 to 45 years of settlement and development here in the Mahoning Valley. And just a couple images I put up, an excerpt from a 1820s map of the Connecticut Western Reserve, which you'll see at larger size soon. And then there's one of the many taverns that used to inhabit the village of Youngstown, and the city later in the 19th century. So, I think prehistoric is accurate because people have been moving through, settling, picking up and moving on, literally for 15 millennia, we believe, since the retreat of the Wisconsin ice sheet that covered the Mahoning Valley back longer than that. And there are documented trails and portages that indigenous people use. If you look at the larger image up there, and you can see this cursor on the screen here? Okay. So here you see the Mahoning River watershed and the Cuyahoga River watershed, and that area between is called a portage. And guess what county it's in? Thank you. So eastern Portage County is in the Mahoning watershed, and western Portage County, where Kent is, on the Cuyahoga River. So that's an important part of moving around, because there's a lot of walking involved, but also the waterways provided transportation going way back. And you can see this map takes you all the way down to Pittsburgh, the Ohio River, and then the Beaver River coming up, which, of course, the Mahoning watershed is part of the larger Beaver River watershed. And then below that, you can see a larger portion of the corner of the 1820s map of the Connecticut Western Reserve as it has become more developed and defined with political subdivisions. And also you can see a little more accuracy on the Mahoning River watershed there as well. And it's amazing that how close to the geographic corner of the Connecticut Western Reserve the river itself is, and therefore it was a gateway into northeastern Ohio. We had the mountain route through Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh to Beaver, and then up the Beaver River into the Mahoning Valley. And the second one was Hudson River, Mohawk River to Lake Erie and down along the lake. And in 1796, John Young took the mountain route and came up the Mahoning River Valley, and Moses Cleveland took the upstate New York route down the shore of Lake Erie to the Cuyahoga River, which then he started to plan a settlement there. Now, other than the feats and canoes or flat boats or rafts on navigable streams, this is something that's hard to believe now if you look at the Mahoning River, but it was, at that time, late 18th century, navigable all the way to the falls in what is now Leavittsburg. So it was very easy to move with a canoe or a flatboat up and down the Mahoning River. Anybody want to venture a guess as to why it's no longer navigable? I heard a lot of answers. Sediment? Dams. Okay. Close, but actually the dams created pools behind them. Anybody have a natural reason for it? Let's remember at that time period, the Mahoning River was part of a wilderness. And this area was completely covered with virgin forest. And one of the things that trees do very well is hold water and release it slowly. So you had a natural system of holding water but releasing it, which made the river 1 to 2 feet higher year-round than we see it today, which made it more navigable. And settlers came in after 1796, cut down most of the trees, and the water retention system went away. And so you had more floods, more shallow pools in the dry seasons, etc. So water transportation went away pretty quick. And so then that led to ground transportation, and really your options were limited to your feet, or if you had your own horse, and maybe a horse and buggy, though considering the terrain is very hard, you need a very sturdy vehicle to get through a lot of areas. So the people that were coming from New York, from Western Pennsylvania, from Virginia into this area top left corner there, there's a classic Conestoga style wagon. And those were very prevalent throughout the 18th and 19th century, not only out west, like you saw in the Western movies, but through the east and through Pennsylvania, etc., in terms of having a large vehicle to carry people and material and a convertible top on it as well. So that was the primary thing. And next thing that evolved early in the 19th century, the 20s, 18th, 30s, was a system of coaches or stage coaches that you can see there also. And these came along as the roads improved. Again, they're sturdy vehicles and they're enclosed oftentimes, and there was also, for some people, seating on top if you didn't want to pay for an inside seat. And so these stages ran through here to Cleveland, to Pittsburgh, so there was a network of these coaches. But as you can see by the size of the vehicle and the terrain, it's has its limitations. The biggest one being how much material you could bring. I mean, you would need a Conestoga or other style wagon to haul goods in. So the community at this time had very scarcities in terms of goods. They had to use their ingenuity in terms of having local blacksmiths, woodworkers, etc., create houses, create horseshoes, iron cooking implements, tools. That had to happen mostly locally, but there were goods coming in through wagons and stagecoaches throughout this period. And these are not specific to the Mahoning Valley, but stagecoaches came in, they brought people, they brought shipments, they brought mail. It was very important to moving mail here and to other communities throughout what was then the United States. And so their stopping point was usually a tavern in a town or city, and that was the case here in Youngstown and other parts of the Mahoning Valley. And we're aware locally here in downtown Youngstown of several taverns, and one that we know was a stagecoach stop was the Mahoning House, run by P.H. Dean. And you can see in the upper left, this is a sign that we actually have in our collection that would have been out front of the Mahoning House. It was located on East Federal Street. Again, can you see my cursor? This is East Federal Street, 1882, running along there. And there's a red star there. And that was the location of the Mahoning House, where the coaches would pull up and offload the passengers and goods and mail, and pick up additional passengers who were going to go further down the road. You remember from the title slide there was another brick building there, which was on Central Square, and that was the Youngstown House, again a tavern. Don't know if it had stages there or not. And in the bottom left there is another photo of a early 19th century tavern called the American House, and this one was on West Federal Street on the 200 block. And this is an early 20th century photo, and this building was not long from the world as commercial development continued through downtown. So when these stages came in, to let people know that they were here, and oftentimes the tavern keeper blew a horn, which is called the tally-ho horn, to let people in town know that the stage was here. And we actually have one on the table over here if you want to look at it. It's rather large and could make a good note to it. And that was how we worked with transportation, especially going intercity and particularly between Cleveland and Pittsburgh. We're always connected between those two communities and the cities as they grew larger, in some cases faster than us, but the connections were always there in terms of markets for goods, industry, and just people moving in and out. Now, 1840 to 1870, this is what I call commercial waterway, but as you can see from this beautiful painting, which, by the way, is not Mahoning Valley, it's western New York. We don't have any hills that big here, but it just captured my imagination looking at it, and so I stole it from offline, and here it is for you to see in terms of a typical canal packet boat. But there was always an interest in having more regular, safer waterways that can move larger amounts of material and people. The state of Ohio was involved in this as far as chartering canal companies and locations from the 1820s onward. And so we had our canal area here in Mahoning Valley starting in 1840, which was 5 years after the founding of the Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal Company. And that was made up predominantly of local people, though there were investors from other parts of Ohio, because this canal was very important to connect the Ohio Canal that ran from Cleveland and Lake Erie to the Ohio River, but also on the eastern side to connect with the Beaver River Valley all the way down to the Ohio River. And so a lot of people invested in it. Kind of interesting in my standpoint, because there was a competing parallel canal in Columbiana County called the Sandy and Beaver, which was actually brought together by investors from Columbiana County and then elsewhere. It was not chartered by the state of Ohio, but they built it anyway. They had a lot of operational problems after it opened in the late 1830s, and it lasted less than 25 years on its own, and in fact only ran from the Ohio Canal to the Beaver or Ohio River for less than 10 years, and they had problems in the middle division. But if you want to see canal ruins, you need to go there, because there's precious little left of the Pennsylvania and Ohio Canal due to the fact that it was taken over by railroads. But anyway, here's a view of the canal. I did not put one up to show the full length of it from Akron down to the Ohio River, but through Youngstown, you can see very strategically placed in downtown. Here it is running parallel with the river. At Spring Common, it is right on the edge of the river. There's a small berm dividing them, and it comes here through the floodplain. There's a turning basin there, turning basin here, and then it continues on a parallel path with the river down through Youngstown Township, and then into Poland Township and Struthers and Lowellville. And here's just an image of somebody, canal historian, did some wonderful illustrations of the locks and how these boats move through. In some cases, the canal was a separate bed. In some cases where it was possible, the canal was actually in the Mahoning River, because there are sections of it that were navigable. And one of those examples was recently taken out down in Lowellville. There were the remains of the dam that held water back for the lock that took people out of the river, took the packet boats out of the river and put them back into the canal bed running parallel. And here's some more of the drawings, and you can see illustrations of the typical packet boat for freight. And this is actually the one for Camel and Struthers and Lowellville on the top. You can see a typical lock down there. And then the last one is in the Briar Hill section, where it runs pretty much on a straight line along the river. And if you look there, you can see, you have a blast furnace here, and another blast furnace here. These are the early Briar Hill Iron and Coal Company works in Briar Hill. And and that's what was critical, was really got the iron industry going here in the Mahoning Valley, was to have a way to move large quantities of raw materials and then finished products out of the furnace markets for these early industrial goods that were made here in the Mahoning Valley. And it was reliable you had some reservoirs along the way to keep the water level up. Of course, it could only run maybe 10 months of the year, 9.5, depending on the winter. When everything froze over, then you had to wait for the thaw to begin moving boats up and down the canal. But had a good run here in the Mahoning Valley, was fully active from 1840 until 1870, and then sections of it were starting to close down. And photo on the left is a good example of that. I mentioned Spring Common. That's the Spring Common Bridge built in the 1860s. Mahoning River is on the right, and then you see that berm, and there's the canal right on the edge of it. This is about 1870, 1871, and if you look closely down in the bottom right corner, you can see why there's no boats or oxen or horses moving up and down the canal, because there's a railroad track running on the towpath of the canal. And so at that point it was pretty well doomed. I threw in another photograph here of another type of watercraft that was on the Mahoning River. Behind that boat there, you can see that white building. There is actually a livery where people could rent rowboats and go out on this section of the river, which had a pool that was created by a dam that was made up for the Baldwin Flour Mill, which is where the Marshall Street Bridge is today. And so that was the Mahoning Pleasure Boat Company. You could climb on this boat. It was steam powered, and it would take you on a tour all through this section of the river, all the way up west until it was no longer navigable, and then back again. So there was other watercraft in this period, and but then water transportation really took a dive in the 1870s, at least here locally. Now, next era we want to talk about are the railroads, interurbans, and streetcars. And this is really a very important era. I know cars and trucks and buses are important too, but in terms of the development of the Mahoning Valley, it was facilitated in large part by the railroads. And I'm going to go back a couple of slides. I was showing you the canal in this map of downtown Youngstown, but you'll notice also here you can see the railroad. The Cleveland and Mahoning Railroad, to be precise, was coming through the north end of downtown in the central village, and then continued downstream, and then there was a branch that went up Crab Creek northward into Trumbull County. And that's how we can fix the date of 1856, because the Cleveland and Mahoning Railroad, again, was financed by local people and also people in Cleveland to make better, more reliable connections, and construction began, I believe, in 1854. The line got to Warren, I believe, in October of 1856, and then Youngstown in November of 1856. So we know exactly when the railroad era started here in the Mahoning Valley. And throughout this period, you had the early ones like Cleveland and Mahoning that owned the entire right-of-way and all the track. Eventually, larger railroads came in and leased that line, and then other railroads came in, like the Pittsburgh, Youngstown, and Ashtabula, to build other lines on the other side of the river. And so after the Civil War into 1900, there was a lot of railroad building. And the need was there as far as the burgeoning industry here in the Mahoning Valley and in Cleveland and in Pittsburgh, and the capital was there too to build these railroads. And to say that railroads were king here in the Mahoning Valley is an understatement. And and that's the reason why, for show and tell, we have this brilliant, wonderful railroad map, which, as you can see, is more than 25 long. It was drawn and pieced together and printed in the blueprints in 1912. And when the lights come back on, if you want to take a peek at it, the western end of it is rolled up because it's actually longer than 3 8-foot tables, or actually it's we only have 22 feet of table, and we have close to 25 feet of map. But in great detail, you can just see how much of the landscape is taken up by railroads, and how they tied into the industries such as Republic Iron and Steel Company and Youngstown Sheet and Tube Company down at the other end, Struthers and Campbell. And it's one of my favorite artifacts. If anybody's asking me what are my favorite artifacts, this is definitely one of them. And when I found this in the larger collection of drawings from Republic Steel Corporation, it was just like, wow. So take a look at that. But there were 4 players as far as trunk lines for the eastern United States. And you have to remember, railroads were divided by Chicago. You had the railroads that went Chicago westward, and you had the railroads that went Chicago east and south. And only now are we talking about having a real transcontinental railroad company. But the 4 players here were Baltimore and Ohio. This again is late 19th into the 20th century. The Pennsylvania Railroad, and the other one was the New York Central Railroad, and I have to qualify that because people are going to say, well, what about the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie? Well, Pittsburgh and Lake Erie were the division of New York Central, and there was another division called the Lake Shore and Michigan Southern, which ran along Lake Erie through northern Ohio, which is still a very active main line, and that was also a division of the New York Central. This station that you see in the upper left corner was built on Wilson Avenue near Kimrod Avenue in the mid-1920s. Beautiful kind of transitional toward Art Deco structure. Again, you have the circular drive, very well appointed inside, and then steps down to the tracks. And that point where it was the actual junction between the Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad lines going east to Pittsburgh and the Lake Shore lines going north to Lake Erie. That junction happened right there. So you had choices through them. The Pennsylvania Railroad, through leases and acquisitions, got into this market late in the 19th century. The building on the left, bottom left right there, was the first 1890s Pennsylvania Railroad station, and that functioned until about 1947 or 48, when it was taken down for construction of the current firefighter's bridge up here, or the Spring Common Bridge. And then over on the right there, you can see what Pennsylvania Railroad built and opened in 1948, which is further down Martin Luther King Boulevard, later becoming Greyhound bus terminal. But great piece of mid-century modern architecture on this train station, and very few train stations were built after World War II. It was really out of necessity, and that's what happened here. So that building survives, as do these two. The Erie Railroad, which continued to operate on the former Cleveland and Mahoning Railroad lines through downtown. You can see the building in its original form with this in the front of it, a single-story commercial pump out for waiting room, shops, etc. That was taken off of the building when West Commerce Street was widened. And this is an early, like 1912 image of the B&O station, which still survives today. And these stations made connections across the country for railroad travel, but they also ran regular commuter lines to Cleveland and Pittsburgh. And there's an example of an excursion ticket from 1929. And it's a special excursion train going to Pittsburgh to watch Notre Dame play Carnegie Tech football in Pittsburgh. So it's kind of cool that we have that. Now, one of the interesting geographic features, and I think you can kind of see it on the map here as it developed, is those four lines, which in this section would have been the Erie, the Pittsburgh Lake Erie, Pennsylvania, and Baltimore, Ohio. They all crossed each other at one point, and that was Center Street. And here you can see in an earlier view of it, probably 70s, early 80s, and then the bottom view of the Center Street Bridge is right there. The crossing, you can see a Conrail train, so just coming through there. What's really interesting is that little shanty you see there. That's a signal shanty. You may not know this, but I'm kind of a railroad nerd. In the late 1980s, before they built the new Center Street Bridge, you can could go down there, park, and watch trains come through. There was only 3 railroads at that point because of mergers, but there was still a lot of traffic, and on more than one occasion, trains were meeting up and signaling, and you saw somebody come out of that signal shanty waving a flag as far as you go, you stop. And this is the late 1980s, so definitely low tech. But it's probably true that more railroad tonnage of goods pass through here than definitely probably anywhere else in the state of Ohio, but a good part of the country, because of those 4 lines intersecting and crossing there. Other forms of rail transportation were streetcars and interurbans. Now, what's the difference? A streetcar is a local form of mass transit, and you can see the Youngstown Street Railway Company on the top left there. There's a summer car because it's open, and if you look at the lettering on the front, it says Idora Park. And so this street railway, over a period of time, especially in the 20th century up until the 1930s, ran an extensive line of local streetcar service throughout the city. And one of the features that we still talk a lot about today is that predecessor of this company actually started Idora Park on their property at the terminal off of Parkview Avenue, the Park and Falls Street Railway, and they still ran streetcars into the 30s out to Idora Park in the summer. And of course, the whole point of it was more ridership, especially on weekends. And so those are local things, and a lot of cities and towns had those, but then you had interurban service, which is connecting towns. And here you can see on the left is an interurban car right in Central Square. On front of it says Warren. So there's an inner-city connection going on there. And then to the right, this is actually on East Front Street. There's an interurban car on the Youngstown and Southern pulling out of the middle of the street into the station, which was on East Front Street. Probably mid-1940s, the Youngstown and Southern actually stopped their service about 1946, and then just stuck to freight traffic after that on the YNS, which runs through the south side into Boardman, into Columbia County, down to Darlington, Pennsylvania. But these were the big people movers, especially in the peak 1920s and 1930s. So, but I put a time period of 1950 to the end of the railroads, and there's a reason for that. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we conclude. But I want to go into something about getting off the rails and onto roads, and that's automobiles, and that covers a lot of ground with private, passenger, commercial, and public transit vehicles. And for my cover photo, I chose one of my favorites from Lordstown, actually, early in the production of the Chevrolet Vega, where they actually devised cars to park on the side decks of the cars, tie them down, and then lift them up. So they were transported nose down on the railroads, which is really kind of interesting and fascinating. I wondered if that may have been part of the reason why so many Vegas were lemon. I don't know. Another problem was they were pretty much water soluble. And anyway, we're not going to bash General Motors too much here. Anyway, so let's talk about that a bit. And personal automobiles really leads the way and still dominates our transportation network. Today, in 1895, is a real definite date, especially here in Youngstown. And you can see on the left there, this car, this horseless carriage as it were, was built by the Fredonia Wagon and Coach Company. It was still a wagon builder in 1895 for a Youngstown physician named Dr. Carlos Booth. And he is supposedly the first doctor who made house calls on a horseless carriage. And so he was quite a point of interest for people in Youngstown and other ways where he went on riding in his car. And Fredonia built this for him on spec. This is a one-off construction of this car. And as you can see, it looks very much like a wagon. You've got probably hard rubber tires, and all you need is the reins coming through the front there, and a horse in case your motor broke down. So that's where Fredonia started, and we'll talk more as we get further in here. On the bottom right, you can see a 1900 Packard Model A, and this was the first sold in the city of Warren, and I'm totally blanking on the name of the industrialist that bought this car from the Packard brothers, but it's Warren built and operated in the city of Warren with its first owner. Now, this era, like 1890s to about 1910, as far as auto collectors and aficionados are concerned, and historians call the brass era, because the cars had a lot of brass on them as far as the radiator shrouds, the headlights and taillights, the various lines and fixtures, and there were a lot of automobile manufacturers throughout the country, we're talking hundreds, building cars in cities and towns. Oftentimes they were built by existing wagon works, or they operated out of wagon works, like one we'll talk about here in Youngstown, and it was a separate company. But from Dr. Booth's car, the Fredonia manufacturing company really got going in the late 1890s, and they built a number of cars. You can see this is called a touring car in terms of the top left, and then in the middle, and there's runabouts and touring cars, primarily this era. Runabouts are two-seaters, and a good example is right here in this image, which is the Fredonia owned by Ambrose Perkins, who was part of the Youngstown Police Department and lived out on where Mahoning Avenue and Meridian Road intersects, and that's why it's called Perkins Corner. The runabouts are two-seaters. Touring cars had a back seat, you can see 4 or 5, and these are both Fredonia touring cars. They advertised the fact that a Fredonia runabout, I believe in 1903, won an endurance race from New York to Boston, and so that was a lot to shoot your horn about. What else that wasn't it? So just want to talk about that. I included this page, which you can find still on our website, right?
Yeah.
This is something we did during the pandemic shutdown in 2020, but did you know about our local car manufacturing? And you can see what we call the big three as far as the ones that made the most cars. There were others that made just a handful or one prototype that never went anywhere, but that would be Packard Motor Company, founded in Warren, and then the Fredonia model factory is actually next to the Market Street Bridge, and the Mahoning factory was just about 2 blocks away from here at the corner of West Boardman and Eagle Street. So, we'll talk more about auto traffic in terms of challenges that we have, but there are other motorized vehicles on rubber tires, including what you see here. Bottom left is what replaced the rail-operated trolleys, and that's actually an electric bus, and you can see the trolley poles on the back, which connected to the same overhead lines that the rail cars did from about 1937 to the mid-50s when they went out of commission. And so you have a combination of gasoline and diesel buses, electric. This is a 1920s, what was called a jitney bus, and a lot of movies in the 20s and 30s have this kind of vehicle, and thinking what it happened one night. These were inner-city buses, so there was room for baggage and shipments of things, and some comfortable seating as well. And the terminal for bus transportation, of course, before the station across the street, was at the McKelvey's Arcade, and that included local, regional buses, and also Greyhound had their ticketing office there, and you loaded usually on Commerce Street to go about through a good part of the 20th century. And these are great documentary photos because, as far as transportation was concerned, 1920s, 30s, 40s, the absolute hub was downtown Youngstown, especially Central Square. And these are 2 different views, maybe a couple of years apart, but you can see looking from the southeast corner of West Federal Street there. You can see ticket booths here, depending on where you're going. You pay for your ticket there, and this is about 1930, where you have a combination of interurban buses, streetcars, and a lot of automobile traffic all converging on downtown Youngstown. And that's something that's hard to believe for anybody who wasn't around in that time period, because it was very congested, and it led to some issues in the future. So, I gotta get rolling here. I want to talk about aviation. Again, this is very important for different reasons. We obviously, at Youngstown Warren Regional Airport, don't have commercial carriers that can take us to a lot of places. It's mostly charter and executive aircraft, but there is a rich aviation history here as well. My cover photo is actually shot from an airplane. You can see the struts and the wing. That is Lansdowne Airport over on the Sharon line on the east side of Youngstown. How many people know what it was originally called? You didn't think there would be quiz today, did you? When it first opened, I think in 1923 or 24, it was called the Youngstown Municipal Airport. And it was later named Lansdowne Field in honor and memory of a Lieutenant Zachary Lansdowne, who was piloting and was killed in a crash of a dirigible. I think it was a Navy dirigible called the USS Shenandoah. And so there were a lot of actually Lansdowne airports around the country because it was a very famous and sad story. But before that, runways and aviation was very much makeshift. In the top here we have an image. This is actually an image of a pioneer aviator named Eugene Eli, who did barnstorming and exhibitions across the country with a plane that he had to assemble wherever he went. And he was at Willis Field on the south side of Youngstown in October 1910 and did an aerial exhibition around the south side with his plane, and that is documented as the first aircraft to fly over Youngstown, going that far back. Just a side note for the can't help myself, but Eugene Eli was pioneering in a number of ways. The next year, 1911, he was, I believe, the first person to land an airplane on a warship. And what they did is the USS Pennsylvania was a battleship. They built a wooden deck across the rear portion of it, and he brought his plane in and landed it there to show that it was possible for naval aviation. Down below there is somebody with a great deal of local significance and national aviation. That's our pioneer aviatrix, Mary Ann Campana. She was born in Italy, came here, educated in a school, worked in retail most of her life, but she was very interested in flying and took lessons, I believe at Ernie Hall's airport, and got her pilot license at age 18. And later in her 18th year, she set a light plane flight endurance record. I'm not sure if that's the plane she flew on. I don't think it is, but she piloted a Taylor Cub aircraft, which had an extra gas tank, which she sat next to in the cockpit, and she flew that thing around the Youngstown area for 12 hours and 27 minutes, which broke the record. She had sandwiches and drinks, and so it was a big deal when it happened, and she's been honored many times since then. Okay, now, the bottom right might be familiar. We know it as Youngstown Warren Regional Airport. You can see the top left is the second Youngstown Municipal Airport built in Vienna. And a very interesting story as to why the Youngstown Municipal Airport is there. I'm going to try to do it as concisely as possible. But three individuals, Henry Romer, who was president of Sharon Steel Corporation, Michael J. Kerwin, who was our region's congressman here in Ohio, and Forrest Beckett, who was what's called a fixed base operator in terms of providing fuel and maintenance and repair for airplanes at airports. They envisioned not just a new expanded municipal airport, but a truly regional airport in the mid-1930s, and they worked very hard and diligently to put that together. And the plan was to use WPA funds from the federal government and to have cooperation between Sharon and Mercer County, Pennsylvania, Warren and Trumbull County, and Youngstown and Mahoning County. And so they were getting ready to apply for the WPA funds, and was one of the last projects that was done in 1939, 1940. Sharon could not participate because they couldn't get legislation through the state house in Sharon or in Pennsylvania to invest in another state. Warren backed out, and it came down to either this wasn't going to be built, or if it was going to be Youngstown's financial responsibility, and the city to take on that responsibility. Therefore, it became the Youngstown Municipal Airport, and was until the mid-1980s when the city could no longer afford to operate it, and that's when it became, again, what it was intended to be, a truly regional facility. So, you can see a United Airlines plane on the tarmac there going out to taxi to the runway. There was regular commercial service, but that became sporadic and troublesome. But what has really made this such an important asset is United States Air Force Reserve. And they have operated out there since the 1950s. As far as the overall civil defense plan, more recently they've operated a fleet of C-130 cargo planes that are very specialized in the things they can do, and they are called the 910th Airlift Wing and the Youngstown Air Reserve. I forget the last letter. Anyway, so yards, Air Reserve Station thing. And so major investment has gone on as far as extending runways and keeping this Air Reserve Station going because of its huge economic impact here in the Mahoning Valley. And so that, along with executive charter aircraft and personal aircraft for flying enthusiasts, has is where it's at right now, and they do some programs out there as far as air shows and exhibits and open houses for the 9-10. Now, I need to wrap it up, but I'm going to just talk about some issues that we've had. Here's a great documentary photo taken in the early 1960s. I don't know if anybody can recognize that, but it's below that concrete bridge is Mill Creek and Mill Creek Park. That is the Interstate 680 bridge that curves around and goes underneath the Mahoning History Bridge. And is currently, starting this week, the whole part of that Interstate 680 is being rebuilt. Now, issues are that freeways move people quickly through communities. They are limited access, which means it's limited to get on and off, and are not conducive to bring people to your commercial centers, etc. But it's very much a part of our lives here and now, but it is still an issue, and we do begin to have a discussion, just a discussion, the Madison Avenue Expressway, which comes off 680 and goes around the north side, potentially abandoning it as a limited access arterial highway and recreating it as a surface roadway to connect directly with the streets. Purely discussion right now, but it's something to consider because of the high cost of maintenance for these arterial highways. Automobiles have really changed the way we go about. Some early commercial developments on the outer south side. This is, probably recognize that Market Street at South Avenue, the Uptown District. And of course, further out with shopping centers in Boardman, Austintown, Liberty. That's actually Boardman in the late 1950s and the Boardman Plaza. So automobiles the volume is very high. So it really took the pressure off and took a lot of business away from downtown as far as being a hub. But there were attempts to make downtown automobile friendly, which are down below here. And that's Commerce Street. You probably recognize the bridge and the parking deck, and here's the Erie Terminal. Commerce Street in the 1930s was a 60-foot wide right-of-way. Now it's 100 feet wide, so a lot changed there for automobile traffic. You have places like this, which is the corner of East Federal and East Commerce. It's a large 5-lane loop that takes you around the north side of downtown. Oh, I want to say something. So we're trying to widen the road, but then in the 1970s we had the idea, well, let's bring pedestrians back downtown. So we created a pedestrian plaza on East and West Federal Street around the square and extended it. And unfortunately, it was too late. And there are other reasons why that didn't work as well, and that's all gone now. More recently, after we widened many of the roads and streets around downtown Youngstown, we put them through a lane diet, as they called it. You can see this one out front. Right, there's Tyler History Center on the right, in the top corner there. And so we went from a 2-lane with a parking on the curb to a single lane with no parking on the curb with plenty of vegetation in front of us. And then this is Front Street, which used to be 4 to 5 lanes. It's now 2 lanes with a wide bike path here and a walking path along the way there. So every generation takes a different approach to solving problems, and transportation is obviously a very important one for all of us. Now, to wrap it up, where can you learn more? Obviously here, which is why we're having some show and tell. We have a lot related to local railroads, the local streetcar and bus outfits, especially the Mahoning or Youngstown Municipal Railway Company, which is now called WRTA. One of our best and most important transportation artifacts is right in the lobby here. This 1905 Mahoning, built, as I said, 2 blocks away between 1904 and 1905, and they were out of business by 1906, but this is the only known surviving example of a Mahoning touring car. But there are other places you can go in Mahoning and Trumbull County. A really cool place is up in Trumbull County. the Irving Hall Flying Museum, and there's actually a grass landing strip there. This airplane that you see was actually Ernie Hall's, and then inside they collected a lot of local memorabilia for local aviation history. Of course, the National Packard Museum, even though Packard Motor Car Company left Warren in 1903, we still claim it here in the Mahoning Valley. That there's a really good museum with an outstanding collection of Packard automobiles on Mahoning Avenue, northwest in Warren. For railroad history, there's a couple of very interesting sites. One is on Poland Avenue, and you'll see that sign down there that says Jim Martyr Yard. There's literally a railroad yard there with a lot of interesting rolling stock. Much of it was very much designed for the local steel industry, and it has local origins, and that's the Mahoning Valley Railroad Heritage Association that operates there. And then out on 62, heading toward Hubbard, there's Youngstown Steel Heritage. Now, their primary thing is our local industry. They have a steam engine built by the William Todd Company here in Youngstown. They used to operate a mill at the Briar Hill Works. They've since bought other mill equipment, but this is the only place you can go in the Mahoning Valley to see a live steam train and actually ride on it. That's a Porter switching engine, which is on a 2-foot gauge track, and they, during the warm months, will take you out about a half mile or so through their property and then bring you back, and it's running on steam. So here's another local view, Ross Radio. You might recognize the building. But thank you all for being here today. Are there any questions you want to bring up at this point? That we have 2 minutes.
That they're testing out autonomous bots up here
Yep.
around the university. And I'm wondering, what do you think they would have here?
Well, I don't know. That's part of the reason they're testing. They had 2 autonomous buses running at one point. One did its thing, just wasn't working up to standard, so that tested over. But WRPA is still hosting another autonomous shuttle bus. I don't know. We'll see. This is new technology, and we talk about autonomous vehicles. There's a lot of concerns about them, but that's why we're testing it right now.
I rode that bus yesterday.
Yeah.
You go to the backside of WRC, it's there by every 20 minutes, it goes up by that side. That's the university, just Canadian hospital. Go over here and take you right there. And there's a person on it. A mandatory by state law.
Yes, that's a safety feature. There is a driver who potentially can take control of something malfunctions. Thank you.
Why did they build it without right along the river?
Easy access to water, and like I said, in some cases, especially on the P&O along the Mahoning River, boats actually went out of the canal bed and onto the river in areas that were deep enough for boats, and that just saved them a lot of time and money to do that. And it's also the most efficient way, because if you build too far away from water sources, it gets to be a problem, like the Sandy and Beaver Canal in Columbia County. Yes?
A while ago, we talked about the Mahoning Gallery.
Yes.
Is that near where the RPM building is, your building?
It was probably further up, like in the 300 block. Maybe probably the 300 blocks today. Yeah.
Where about the block or here? You were trying to build here.
Yeah. That is another half hour to 45-minute presentation. And suffice to say that it was an idea after Studebaker went out of business to continue, because that was a really ahead of its time automobile. And Yes. I'm sorry, what? Oh, yes. This is, again, one of my favorites. This is 1916. It's a railroad yard in downtown Youngstown. And it's New York Central. But all these boxcars you see here with double doors, they were used to transport cars out of factories. And this is a line of 1916 Studebakers that were delivered downtown. The Studebaker dealer here was the Youngstown Carriage and Wagon Company. They made a full change into automobile sales and service, and so they were delivering cars along the railroad. I'm not really sure of the location, but it could be a little further out, as you said, just because of congestion of downtown.
I associate Lake River now with Carlin Pond, but I assume there were earlier efforts to complete the Lake River Canal. Can you talk about that?
I don't know when that discussion started, but Congressman Michael Kerwin, it was his signature efforts through the late 40s, 1950s, as he rose in power and prominence in Congress, and he got about this close to building his, as it was called, a $1 billion ditch. And it would have involved access to Lake Erie, a massive reservoir that extended between northern Trumbull County and Ashtabula County, and then a canal that came down to the Mahoning River and ran parallel with it. And I believe they were even talking about channeling parts of the river for the canal. So it was a huge undertaking, but the reason was a cheaper way to get bulk materials into the steel industry rather than using railroad cars, because the barges would hold so much more. But like I said, it got this close, had a whole lot of pushback and resistance from other urban areas of the country as far as the amount of investment here, and it didn't materialize. One more?
What year was it?
When they first came here, they had two generations of fighter jets or interceptors, basically, and they were still around in the 1970s, I believe, but then they transitioned into the cargo planes. Okay, one more. Just one more. No more. Okay. Who? Bob? It's part of our collection. It actually goes back to the earlier 19th or 20th century. And the provenance is Sally Hohorn. As I said, that was the signal for a stage was coming in. Yep. I don't know all the provenance off the top of my head. So thank you. Let's look over. Please come up with a book, but don't touch. And if you have any more questions, I'll be happy to try to answer. So thanks.
All right, thank you, Bill, and thank you all for coming, and we will see you next month in May for Justice Trinkets, Greystone and Arts and Crafts Homes. Thank you all so much. Can we do a hand over